Ethan and Jack Miller were two poor brothers living in a small, forgotten town. Life had never been easy for them. They worked from sunrise to sunset, doing whatever jobs they could find. Sometimes they repaired old fences for neighbors. Sometimes they washed cars. Sometimes they just picked up junk to sell for a few dollars. Their clothes were old, their shoes worn out, but they still carried a strange kind of hope that one day something would change. They lived in a small rented house that always smelled of damp wood. The roof leaked when it rained, and the heater barely worked in winter. But no matter how hard life got, the brothers never gave up. Every night after dinner, they sat together on the couch, dreaming of better days. Ethan, the older one, always said, "One day, we'll find our chance. We just have to keep looking." Jack would smile and nod, though deep down, he wasn't sure if that day would ever come. One evening, after finishing a long day at work, Jack sat down with his old laptop. He often looked through online auction sites, not to buy anything, but just to imagine what he would do if he had money. That night, as he scrolled through listings of old cars, furniture, and random antiques, something strange caught his eye. It was an auction for a huge old mansion. The title said, "Abandoned Kennedy Mansion for Sale, Starting Bid, $250. Jack almost laughed. A mansion for $250? That had to be a joke. He clicked the listing out of curiosity, and his eyes widened when he saw the photos. The place was enormous, like something from a movie. Tall white pillars, cracked windows, vines covering the walls, and a large gate rusted with age. The description said the property had once belonged to the Kennedy family, the same family that included President John F. Kennedy. The place was now in ruins, abandoned for decades. And the town wanted to sell it off because no one would take care of it, Jack shouted. "Ethan, you have to see this." His brother walked over, still wiping grease from his hands after fixing their truck. Ethan looked at the screen and whistled softly. "That's real?" he asked. Jack nodded. "It says it's real, but nobody wants it. They say it's haunted." Ethan laughed. "Haunted? Or just too broken down to bother with?" He leaned closer, reading the small text that said, "Property sold as ease. Buyer must handle all restoration costs." It sounded impossible. But still, something about the mansion pulled at both of them. Maybe it was the name Kennedy. Or maybe it was the mystery behind it. Or maybe it was just the dream of owning something grand when life had given them so little. After a long moment, Ethan said quietly, "What if we try?" Jack blinked in surprise. "You mean bid on it?" Ethan nodded. "Why not? We've got $250 saved for rent, but maybe this is a chance. Even if we lose, at least we tried." Jack hesitated, thinking of their empty wallets and unpaid bills. But there was something in Ethan's voice, something hopeful, something that made him believe. That night, under the dim light of their kitchen, the brothers entered the auction. There were no other bidders. They typed in their offer, $250, and waited. A minute passed. 2 minutes. Then, suddenly, the screen flashed. "Congratulations. You were the highest bidder." Jack's jaw dropped. "Wait, we actually got it?" Ethan laughed, shaking his head. "I guess no one else was crazy enough to buy it." They both burst out laughing, a sound that filled their small home with joy they hadn't felt in years. They were excited, but also nervous. Owning a mansion sounded like a dream, but what were they going to do with a broken, abandoned place, once owned by one of America's most famous families? The following week, they received an official email confirming the sale. It came with the property documents and the location Hyannisport, Massachusetts. The same coastal area where the Kennedy family had once lived. The brothers could hardly believe it. They packed their small truck with some tools, food, and old sleeping bags, preparing for a long road trip. They didn't have money for hotels, so they planned to camp inside the mansion itself. As they drove, the excitement grew. Jack imagined walking through grand halls, seeing marble floors and golden chandeliers. Ethan imagined fixing up the place and maybe turning it into a tourist site. But neither of them had any idea what they would really find there. After 2 days of driving, finally reached the edge of a quiet coastal town. The locals stared at their rusty truck as it rolled past. When Ethan stopped at a gas station to ask for directions, the old man behind the counter looked uneasy. "You boys going to the old Kennedy mansion?" he asked slowly. Ethan nodded. "We just bought it." The man's eyes widened in disbelief. "You bought that place? People say it's cursed. Strange things happen there. You better be careful." Jack laughed nervously, but Ethan thanked the man and drove off. They didn't believe in curses, but something about the way the old man spoke sent chills down their spines. When they reached the property gate, the brothers fell silent. The mansion stood in the distance, massive and silent under the gray sky. The paint had peeled away, the roof had holes, and weeds grew waist-high around the path. The once beautiful fountain in front was cracked and dry. "It looked less like a home and more like a ghost of history," Jack whispered. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Ethan nodded slowly. "It's ours now. Let's see what's inside." They pushed open the rusty gate and drove up the path. The sound of gravel under their tires echoed in the still air. When they reached the front steps, they saw the Kennedy family crest carved into the stone. Time had worn it down, but it was still there, a silent reminder of the mansion's powerful past. The front door was heavy and half broken. Ethan pushed it open with a creak that echoed through the empty halls. Dust filled the air. The inside was dark and cold, but beautiful in a strange way. Sunlight slipped through broken windows, lighting up pieces of marble floor and old portraits hanging crooked on the walls. Furniture was covered with white sheets, and spider webs hung like curtains from the ceiling. Jack took a slow step forward. "It feels like time stopped here," he whispered. Ethan nodded, his voice soft. "Yeah, like someone just walked out and never came back." They explored room after room, amazed by what they saw: massive fireplaces, staircases twisting like ribbons, and bookshelves filled with dusty old books. Despite the decay, the mansion still had an air of greatness, like it remembered what it once was by the time the sun began to set. The brothers were sitting in the grand hall, tired but filled with wonder. They had no electricity, no heat, and no idea what to do next. But they felt something powerful in that silence, as if the mansion itself was waiting for them to uncover its story. Jack looked around and said quietly, "Maybe this place chose us." Ethan smiled faintly. Maybe it did. Neither of them knew then that behind the cracked walls and locked doors of that mansion, a secret was hidden, one that would soon change not only their lives, but the way the world remembered history itself. The next morning, the brothers woke up to the sound of waves crashing nearby. Cold air filled the mansion, and dust sparkled in the thin light coming through the broken windows. Ethan rubbed his eyes and looked around. They had slept on the floor of the grand hall, wrapped in old blankets they had brought from home. The silence of the place was heavy, broken only by the distant cry of seagulls. Jack stretched his arms and said, "It feels strange, waking up in a place like this, like we're living inside a memory." Ethan smiled a little and replied, "Maybe we are." They decided to explore more. The front of the mansion was huge, but what they had seen yesterday was only a small part. Every corner they walked into felt like a frozen story. There were rooms with dusty pianos, empty dining tables, and walls filled with portraits of serious-looking men and elegant women. The air smelled of old paper and forgotten perfume in the library. They found hundreds of books, some with leather covers that cracked when touched. Jack ran his hand along the shelves, reading faded titles. "Look at this," he said, pulling out a heavy book. Inside, the pages were yellow, and there were notes written in the margins in neat handwriting. Ethan looked closer and realized the signature at the end of one note was JFK. His heart skipped. "You think this is really his?" he asked. Jack shrugged. "Could be. Maybe this was his private library." They both fell silent, feeling a sudden sense of awe. This wasn't just an abandoned building. It was once the home of one of the most famous men in history. They spent the next few hours exploring every floor. The mansion was like a maze, full of locked doors, narrow hallways, and old furniture. Dust floated through the air like tiny ghosts. Sometimes they would hear strange creaks, or the sound of something falling in another room. Each time, they looked at each other nervously, but tried to laugh it off. "Old house noises," Ethan said. though his voice wasn't very confident. In the afternoon, they went down to the kitchen. It was large, with old-fashioned stoves and cabinets still filled with cracked dishes. A calendar from 1963 hung on the wall, the last date circled in red. "That's the year he died," Jack said quietly. The silence that followed was cold and heavy as they continued to clean and explore. Jack noticed something odd in the library. Behind one of the tall bookshelves, a small crack in the wall seemed out of place. He pressed on it and heard a hollow sound. "Ethan, come here," he called. His brother came over, and together they pushed the shelf aside with great effort. Behind it was something neither of them expected: a metal door. It looked newer than the rest of the mansion, the small rusted lock. Ethan frowned. "This doesn't belong here," he said. The handle was stiff, but they managed to open it a little. Behind the door was darkness and a narrow staircase going down. The air coming from it was cold and smelled of metal and earth. Jack swallowed hard. "A hidden basement?" Ethan nodded. "Let's see where it leads." They grabbed their flashlights and slowly started down. Each step creaked under their feet, echoing in the narrow space. The deeper they went, the colder it got. Their lights flickered against stone walls lined with pipes and wires. At the bottom, it reached a small door that was half covered in cobwebs. Ethan pushed it open. The light revealed a small hidden room filled with wooden crates and metal boxes stacked in corners. Dust lay thick over everything. It didn't look like a normal storage room. It looked like someone had tried to hide it. Jack walked over to the nearest crate. The lid was nailed shut, but with a screwdriver, he managed to pry it open. Inside were stacks of papers sealed in plastic. Some were typed, some handwritten. Each one had government stamps and markings: top secret, confidential, and property of U.S. government. Ethan picked up one folder and read the label aloud. Project Orion -1963. He opened it and saw typed pages about communications, military experiments, and strange maps. Another folder mentioned Cuban crisis logs. Both of them froze. They knew these words from history books, but this was something deeper. Jack's voice was shaky. "Ethan, these look like original files. Stuff that was never supposed to be seen." Ethan's mind raced. Why would such things be hidden in this house? Did JFK hide them himself? Was someone trying to protect this information? In another corner, they found a metal box with a lock that had already rusted through. Inside was an old camera reel, some photographs, and a small black notebook. Ethan carefully opened the notebook. The first page had neat handwriting that made both of them hold their breath. At the bottom, it was signed simply JFK. The pages were filled with personal thoughts, mentions of secret meetings, and names they didn't recognize. Some pages were written in a hurry, words crossed out, emotions spilling out between the lines. One passage caught Ethan's eye. It talked about a peace plan that was meant to end the Cold War and avoid future conflicts. Something that never happened because of interference within. The words were haunting. Jack whispered, "If this is real, then this diary could change everything people know about him." Ethan nodded slowly, his heart pounding. "We need to keep this safe. Nobody can know yet." They decided to check the rest of the boxes. Inside another crate were rolls of film, black and white photographs showing political figures, maps marked with red circles, and letters with presidential seals. The deeper they looked, the more they realized that this hidden room contained secrets that had been buried for decades. Jack sat down on a dusty crate, overwhelmed. Why was all of this hidden here? Who was meant to find it? Ethan looked around the small, dim room. Maybe no one. Maybe it was supposed to stay hidden forever. The air around them felt heavy. For the first time since buying the mansion, fear crept in. This wasn't just an adventure anymore. They were inside something much bigger than themselves, something that connected to powerful people, past and present, as they climbed back up the stairs. Carrying the small black notebook and one sealed folder, both brothers were silent. The mansion above seemed even quieter than before. When they reached the library again, the sunlight had turned orange with evening. Jack closed the metal door behind them and leaned against it, breathing hard. "We shouldn't have opened that," he said softly. Ethan looked at him and replied, "Maybe not, but we can't ignore it now." That night, neither of them could sleep. They sat near a small fire they had built in the fireplace, the notebook lying between them. Every crack of the old house made them jump. They kept thinking about what they had found, about how history might have been different if these secrets had come out earlier. As the fire burned low, Jack whispered, "What if someone comes looking for this?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He just stared at the flames and finally said, "Then we better be ready." Outside, the wind howled around the mansion and the waves crashed harder than before. The old Kennedy house seemed alive again, as if it was waking up after years of silence because its secrets were no longer buried in the dark. The night after they found the secret basement, Ethan and Jack couldn't sleep. The house creaked and groaned as if it was whispering to them. Every time the wind blew, they felt as if someone was walking in the hallways upstairs. Jack stared at the small notebook lying on the floor between them. The cover was cracked and the pages smelled of old paper. He whispered, "Ethan, what if this really belongs to him? What if it's really President Kennedy's diary?" Ethan looked into the fire, his face serious. "Then what we found is bigger than both of us," he said quietly. The next morning they went back to the hidden room. Sunlight filtered through the cracks above, lighting the dust in the air like tiny golden sparks. The brothers were nervous but curious. They felt that something important was waiting for them. This time, Ethan brought a small camera to take pictures of everything they found. They opened another box that they hadn't checked before. Inside were several rolls of old film, a few photographs, and some letters written in elegant handwriting. Jack picked up one photograph. It showed a group of men in dark suits standing near what looked like a large map. The man in the center looked exactly like John F. Kennedy, but what caught Jack's attention was that behind them, there was a large, round, metallic object in the corner of the room. It didn't look like anything from that time. Ethan frowned. "That can't be real." "Maybe it's just the angle," he said. There was doubt in his voice. In one of the envelopes, they found a letter marked for official eyes only. Ethan carefully unfolded it. The letter mentioned something about a secret communication system called Project Oriona, a plan meant to allow instant contact between world leaders during the Cold War. But it also said something more, that the project had another purpose, something not meant for public knowledge. Jack's eyes widened. "This is insane. Why would this be here?" Ethan didn't answer. He was flipping through the diary again, reading every word carefully. Some pages talked about meetings with military generals and scientists. One page said, "If the truth about Orion is revealed too early, the world won't be ready." The more they read, the more confused and fascinated they became. It was like reading the lost thoughts of a man who had carried the world's weight on his shoulders. The diary spoke about secret missions, threats, and JFK's dreams of ending the arms race peacefully. But some entries hinted that he feared people in his own government. They do not want peace. They want control, one line said. Ethan sat back, thinking hard. Jack, if this is real, these papers could change everything people know about history. The question is, why was it hidden here? And who put it here after all these years? As they talked, the wind outside grew louder, making the windows rattle. The old house seemed to groan as if it didn't like them talking about what was buried inside its walls. Jack shivered. Do you think he hid it himself? Ethan nodded slowly. Maybe, or maybe someone close to him did, to protect it. They decided to take some of the papers upstairs to study in better light. The brothers spread everything across a dusty dining table. There were maps showing hidden routes across Cuba, lists of names, and records of private meetings. Some notes mentioned an event planned for November 1963, just days before the assassination. It was labeled, Meeting, Dallas, Final Confirmation. The handwriting was sharp and rushed. Jack stared at it for a long moment before saying he knew something. He must have known something was going to happen. For a while, neither of them spoke. The weight of what they were holding was too much. They weren't historians or experts. They were just two brothers who had bought an old house for $250. And now they were sitting on top of secrets that the world might have tried to forget. Ethan finally broke the silence. "We can't keep this here. It's not safe. We don't even know who might come looking for it." Jack nodded but looked uncertain. "If we tell someone, we might get in trouble. These are government files." Ethan rubbed his forehead. "Yeah, but if we hide them and someone finds out, that could be worse." They decided to take only a few papers and the diary to a nearby library to check for any references or similar documents. Maybe they could confirm if what they had found was real. The librarian, an elderly woman, let them use a private room. She looked curious when she saw the old seals and official stamps, but didn't ask too many questions. The brothers searched online archives and history books. To their shock, the names and dates matched perfectly with real events from the early 1960s. Jack looked at Ethan, whispering, "It's real, Ethan. Everything in here matches history. This is not fake." Ethan leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of the discovery. "Then we just found something the world never knew existed." When they returned to the mansion that evening, the sun was setting behind the trees. The house looked darker than before, almost watching them. They parked the truck and carried the documents inside. As Ethan went to close the main door, he noticed something strange. The lock was broken. His stomach tightened. "Jack, did you open the door when we left?" Jack shook his head quickly. "No, I locked it behind us." Ethan's heart started to race. They slowly walked inside. Everything looked the same until they reached the library. Some of the books they had moved earlier were now on the floor, scattered. The bookshelf that hid the metal door was slightly open. Jack froze. "Someone's been here," he whispered. They rushed downstairs to the secret room. The air smelled different, like dust had been disturbed. One of the crates was open, and several papers were missing. Ethan clenched his fists. "Someone found out," he said, his voice low and angry. Jack looked terrified. "We need to leave. Right now." But Ethan shook his head. "No. Whoever did this might still be watching. If we run, they'll follow." They quickly gathered the most important documents of the diary, the film reels, and a few letters, and packed them in a bag. That night, they didn't light a fire or turn on any lights. They sat in the dark, listening for any sound outside. Every creak and every gust of wind made their hearts jump. At one point, Jack whispered, "What if this is why it was left hidden all these years? Maybe anyone who finds it is in danger." Ethan didn't answer right away. He was staring at the notebook in his hands, tracing the initials JFK on the cover. "Finally," he said softly, "then we have to finish what he started. The truth shouldn't stay buried." The brothers knew they had stepped into something dangerous, something that could change not just their lives, but the world's understanding of history. They didn't know who had been in the house, or how much danger they were in. But one thing was certain: the mansion was no longer just a forgotten home. It was a doorway into the past, and now that they had opened it, there was no turning back. The next morning, the sky was gray, and a thick fog surrounded the mansion. Ethan and Jack hadn't slept at all. The fear from last night still hung in the air. Every sound, every movement made them look over their shoulders. They kept the bag of documents close, never letting it out of sight. Jack made coffee on a small camping stove, but his hands were shaking. "Ethan," he whispered, "someone was in this house. They opened that room. What if they come back?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked toward the window where the fog pressed against the glass like white smoke. "They might," he said finally, "but we can't let fear stop us now. We need to do something." Ethan knew they couldn't keep the files hidden forever. The things they found were too important, too dangerous to stay locked in an old mansion. He suggested they show the papers to someone who could understand what they meant, someone who knew about history and politics. After some searching online, they found a historian named Dr. Linda Carter, who was known for studying Cold War documents and lost presidential archives. Her name appeared in several articles about secret files related to the Kennedy era. Ethan looked at Jack. "She might help us," he said. Jack nodded slowly. "If she's real and not working for whoever wants this hidden," he called her from a nearby cafe, using a public phone. Ethan explained that they had found something in an old mansion once owned by the Kennedy family. He didn't give too many details, only enough to get her attention. For a moment, there was silence on the line. Then the woman's voice said, "If what you're saying is true, I need to see it myself. Meet me in 2 days at the old train station near Boston. Bring the files. Don't tell anyone else." The way she said it made both brothers uneasy, but they agreed. Back at the mansion, they spent those 2 days in silence. They locked the hidden room again and packed their bags. Every night, they thought they heard footsteps outside. Once, Jack saw the shadow of a man standing near the gate, but when he ran outside, no one was there. The fear grew heavier. It felt like the mansion itself was warning them to hurry. On the morning of the meeting, they left early. The roads were wet from rain, and their old truck rattled as it drove through the quiet countryside. They kept checking the rearview mirror, afraid someone might be following them. When they reached the station, it looked almost deserted. The old brick building was covered with moss, and a few birds fluttered under the broken roof. A woman stood near one of the benches, holding a black umbrella. She looked to be in her 50s, with sharp eyes behind her glasses. Ethan approached her carefully. "Dr. Carter?" he asked. She nodded. "You must be the brothers." Her voice was calm, but there was a hint of excitement. "Do you have the files?" Ethan handed her the bag. She opened it slightly and looked inside. When she saw the old papers and the diary, her expression changed completely. She looked shocked, almost scared. "Where did you find these?" she whispered. Ethan explained everything: the auction, the mansion, the secret room. Dr. Carter listened without interrupting. When he finished, she closed the bag slowly. "You have no idea what you've stumbled upon," she said softly. "These documents are real. If what's in this diary is what I think it is, this could prove that President Kennedy was working on something far beyond what history ever recorded." Jack frowned. "What do you mean?" She looked around nervously, making sure no one was nearby. JFK wanted peace with both sides during the Cold War. He was planning a treaty that would have changed everything. But certain people in power didn't want that. They wanted control, fear, and weapons. If these papers show what he was trying to do, it means his death wasn't just a tragedy, it was part of something planned. The words made the brothers go cold. Ethan looked down at the diary, suddenly realizing how dangerous their discovery really was. "So what happens now?" he asked. Dr. Carter took a deep breath. "You too need protection. You can't keep these files with you. I'll take them to a secure archive where they'll be studied legally. But until that happens, you must stay low. Don't tell anyone else." As they were leaving the station, Ethan noticed a black car parked across the street. A man in a suit sat inside, staring at them through dark glasses. When Ethan turned to look again, the car drove away quickly. His stomach tightened. "We're being watched," he muttered. Dr. Carter's face turned pale. "Then we don't have much time." That night, the brothers stayed in a cheap motel on the edge of town. They locked the door and pushed a chair against it. Jack couldn't stop pacing. "This is crazy, Ethan. What if they come after us? What if Dr. Carter isn't who she says she is?" Ethan sat on the bed, thinking. "I don't know," he admitted. "But we started this, and now we have to finish it. The truth deserves to be known." The next morning, Dr. Carter called them. She sounded different, nervous and hurried. "I got the files checked," she said. "They're authentic. But someone knows you have them. You need to get out of that area now." Before Ethan could ask anything, the line went dead. The brothers packed quickly and ran to their truck. As they drove down the narrow road, Jack saw headlights in the mirror, a black car following them again. "Ethan, it's them!" he shouted. Ethan stepped on the gas. The truck roared down the road, splashing through puddles. The car stayed close behind. It followed them for miles until finally, Ethan turned sharply into a forest trail, losing sight of the road. They hid behind a line of trees, breathing heavily. The car passed by, not seeing them. They waited for almost an hour before driving back to the mansion. It was the only place they knew to hide. When they entered, the air felt thick and cold, as if the house itself was angry. Jack collapsed on the couch. "We can't live like this," he said, shaking. "We're just two poor guys who wanted a home. How did it turn into this?" Ethan looked at him sadly. Because the truth is never simple, Jack, and now we're part of it. Later that night, a knock echoed through the mansion. Both brothers froze. Ethan grabbed a flashlight and moved toward the door slowly. "Who's there?" he called. A familiar voice answered, "It's Dr. Carter." Ethan quickly opened the door. She looked exhausted and frightened. "I was followed," she said, stepping inside. "I came to warn you. They're trying to destroy everything. The files, the diary, all of it." "Who are they?" She shook her head. "People who don't want the world to know what really happened. But I made copies of the documents before they could reach me. The truth is safe now." Ethan felt a wave of relief. "So it's over?" he asked. Dr. Carter looked toward the window where the fog was pressing against the glass again. "Not yet," she said softly. "But it will be soon. Once these reach the right hands, history will finally be corrected." That night, as rain began to fall, the three of them sat in the dark mansion, listening to the storm outside. None of them spoke much. Each knew the danger wasn't gone, but they also knew something powerful had begun. The brothers had started as two poor men looking for a better life. But now they had become part of something far greater, something that would soon change the story of an entire nation. The storm outside grew stronger that night, thunder shaking the old mansion as rain poured down the windows. Ethan, Jack, and Dr. Carter sat near the fireplace, trying to stay calm. But everyone could feel that something was about to happen. The crackling fire cast shadows across the walls, making the place feel alive. Dr. Carter looked tired, her eyes darting toward the window every few seconds. "They won't stop," she whispered. "Once you've seen what's inside those files, there's no going back." Jack rubbed his forehead. "Then what do we do now? We can't keep running forever." Ethan looked into the flames. "Yes. We fight back, not with guns, but with truth. If we make the files public, they can't silence all of us." Dr. Carter hesitated. "It's dangerous, Ethan. These people have power. If you upload them or send them to the wrong place, they'll erase everything and maybe even come for you." Ethan met her eyes. "Then we find the right place. It's early." The next morning, before the sun was fully up, Ethan started scanning the copied documents on his laptop. Each page told a story of hidden plans, secret meetings, and messages between powerful people. It wasn't just about JFK. It was about a shadow group controlling governments, companies, and wars for decades. Jack sat beside him, watching. As old letters appeared on the screen written in the president's own handwriting, "He knew," Jack said softly. "He tried to stop them." Ethan nodded, and they killed him for it. Suddenly, the power went out. The lights flickered, then died completely. The laptop screen went black. Jack jumped to his feet. No, what happened?" "Doctor." Carter rushed to the window. "They've cut the power." Outside, through the rain, they saw headlights again. Several black cars stopped at the gate, their doors opening. Shadows of men in suits moved through the storm, heading straight for the mansion. "Get the files," Ethan shouted. Jack grabbed the bag while Dr. Carter opened a small door that led to the mansion's cellar. They hurried down, closing it behind them. The sound of footsteps echoed above, heavy boots entering the house. Ethan whispered, "We can't stay here long. They'll search everywhere." The cellar was damp and smelled of earth, but there was an old tunnel that led toward the forest. Built decades ago for escaping fires or enemies. Dr. Carter pointed to it. "This way." They crawled through the dark tunnel, water dripping from the ceiling. The only light came from Ethan's phone. Behind them, they could hear faint thuds. Maybe the men were breaking through doors upstairs. Jack whispered, "Do you think they know about this tunnel, Doctor?" Carter shook her head. "I doubt it. Even the current owners didn't know half of what this house hid." After several minutes, they reached a small metal door at the end of the tunnel. Ethan pushed it open, and cold wind hit their faces. They were outside, deep in the forest. They ran for nearly an hour, soaked by rain and mud. At last they reached an old abandoned cabin near the river. Exhausted, they locked the door and sat on the floor. Ethan pulled out the copies of the documents, still dry inside the waterproof bag. "We can't hide forever," he said. We need to send these files to the world before they find us again. Dr. Carter nodded. I know a journalist who can help. Someone brave. Someone who won't back down. Using a small satellite phone, Doctor. Carter called a man named Thomas Hale, a reporter known for exposing government secrets. When she told him what they had, he didn't believe her at first. But once she sent him one photo of the papers, a letter signed by President Kennedy himself, his tone changed completely. Send everything you have, he said. I'll publish it immediately. The world deserves to know. Ethan connected his laptop to a battery pack and began uploading the files through a secure channel. It took nearly an hour, every second feeling like forever. Jack stood by the window watching the forest nervously. What if they find us before it finishes? He asked. Ethan didn't look up. Then at least the truth will still get out. Halfway through the upload, they heard the sound of engines again. Dr. Carter's face went pale. They found us, she said. The cabin lights flickered as the vehicle stopped outside. Flashlights swept through the trees. Jack grabbed a metal pipe. We can't just let them take us, he said. Ethan kept typing, his fingers shaking. Just a few more minutes. The door burst open, and men in black suits stormed in. Stay where you are, one shouted, pointing a gun. Jack swung the pipe, hitting one man's arm, but another tackled him to the ground. Ethan shouted, It's done. The files are out. Right before one of the men grabbed him, the upload bar on his laptop reached 100%. A beep confirmed the transfer was complete. Dr. Carter smiled weakly. You can't stop it now, she said to them. It's already in the world. One of the men glared at her, then smashed the laptop. But it didn't matter, the truth was free. Moments later, they were all blindfolded and taken away in the cars. Hours passed before Ethan opened his eyes again. He was in a small room, tied to a chair. Jack was next to him, also bound. A man in a dark suit stood in front of them, calm and expressionless. You made a big mistake, the man said. You think truth changes things, but people forget. They always forget. Ethan stared back at him. Maybe they forget for a while, he said, but not forever. Suddenly there was a knock on the door. Another guard entered holding a phone. He whispered something to the suited man, who frowned deeply. He turned on a small TV in the corner, and there it was. Every news channel was showing the story. Headlines flashed across the screen. Leaked JFK files reveal hidden truth behind assassination. The man's face darkened. Impossible, he muttered. Jack smiled, even with blood on his lip. Looks like people remember faster than you thought. The man's jaw tightened. He turned off the TV and left the room angrily. After that, the brothers were released outside the city with a warning to disappear. They never saw Dr. Carter again. Days later, the world exploded with chaos and questions. News stations debated the new evidence. Protests broke out, demanding answers. The government tried to deny it at first, but there was too much proof. The diary, the letters, the signatures, all real. Historians confirmed it. For the first time, people saw how one of history's most mysterious deaths was part of a much bigger plan. Ethan and Jack watched the news from a small diner in another town. They had changed their names and decided to move far away. Jack looked at his brother and said, "We're safe now?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe, but safe isn't the point anymore. We did what had to be done." Outside, sunlight finally broke through the clouds. For the first time in weeks, everything felt calm. The brothers didn't have money, fame, or comfort, but they had done something that mattered. They had changed history. And somewhere, deep inside, they knew that President Kennedy's truth had finally found the light.